everybody is doing their best, but it is not good enough. I mean, it can do better. Not good enough is probably a judgmental term, but it can do better. How can it do better? By connecting the information sources and ensuring that the data becomes available for people to take decisions on. So whose responsibility it is? And this is an important question to answer when we are talking of public policy on how payment frauds have to be reduced. So RBI has a circular on 2000 issued in 2017 on limiting liability of customers. So it clearly says in which situations the customer is liable, what are the timelines for reporting, and what happens after reporting is done. Third party breaches, there is no liability at all, and so on. And very importantly, which doesn't see much validation, is the burden of proving that customer is liable is on the bank. If a customer says, I have not done anything wrong and this is not my fault, the bank will have to say, okay, we sent you OTP, you received the OTP, and that OTP was put by you, and that's how the fraud has happened. So many times we assume things that OTP sent by bank is directly going to the phone. It is not. It is going to the SMS aggregator, to the telecom service provider, and to the phone. And there have been documented cases of SMS aggregators, somebody sitting and leaking out OTPs, and so on. Controls in telecom have improved, but this was a first case of a telecom employee leaking OTPs was reported long back from South Africa. And so this, if the customer says, I have not done a transaction, the bank will have to incur a lot of effort to say, okay, you did, and this is the evidence for that. Unfortunately, this doesn't seem to be known to anyone or operating as it is. Now, obviously, if something is very large and affecting a large number of people, it goes to the politicians, right? They hear from their constituents and say, kuch karo, isme bahut problem hai. So politicians raise these points, and elsewhere, Singapore, this has been a very hotly debated topic. So people, the legislator, one legislator there is saying that the bank should take on the responsibility for this. They are able to monitor transactions, they can block fund flows, and they know the latest technological developments. Like deep fake was one point which came up, right? So do you think an individual person will ever know of deep fake unless he gets duped by deep fake by the time it's too late? It is up to the technology teams to really look at the trends and then put controls to deal with those trends. So the point of view is, it is not individual customer, but the bank which should be doing it. And of course, why not give physical tokens? Why sending SMS based OTPs, which is there on the mobile? If the mobile is compromised, then everything is lost. So this is the voice which is there. Singapore has implemented something which is for phishing frauds, and it talks about obviously any developed society, citizens are supposed to be aware, right? That is the expectation. And it is not a good idea to assume that citizens cannot bear any responsibility for whatever they do. They have to bear some responsibility. So this model looks at that. And so if the bank has not sent any alert, then it is bank's fault. If the telecom service provider has sent an alert which contains a phishing URL, it is the telecom service provider's fault. So they have to put in measures to scan SMSs going to customers and find terms which will indicate potential fraud and not deliver that SMS. Only verified SMS handles are allowed to send banking SMSs and so on. So that kind of controls are expected, and then if the customer has still fallen, then he bears the loss. But most importantly, the recent initiative in UK for authorized push payment fraud is what I will spend some time on. What happens here is, the journey is, a victim is targeted by the fraudster. Victim responds to that. So authorized push payment is where the victim is willingly making the transaction, and the transaction happens. So there are two scenarios. One is wrong recipient, so money is going to the wrong person, or for wrong purpose. Money is intended for one thing, but it's actually going for something else. So these are the losses for APP, authorized push payment fraud in UK in last year, about 459 million, which is about 5,000 crore rupees. Now the new regulation says that customers will exercise this standard of care. So one is, if the payment service provider is giving an alert saying that this is a potentially fraudulent transaction, The customer, if doesn't heed that and goes ahead, then it is customer's fault. Okay. Now, the second is, if there is a problem, the customer is expected to report promptly, but the time given is 13 months maximum outer limit. Before that, the fraud has to be reported, and the customer should, of course, respond to any follow-up queries from the payment service provider. So, what is the payment service provider is expected to do in this case? So, they have to give specific warnings before a payment is executed, and those warnings should show the intended recipient of the payment is likely to be a fraudster. Now, how will a payment service provider know? Will the payment service provider know or suspect that transaction is suspicious? So, there is a sender PSP, there is a receiver PSP. Between the two, can they find out if one account is receiving lot of incoming amounts, similar amounts, frequent amounts, merchant account, not merchant account, merchant, grocer merchant but receiving 50,000 rupees, I am just giving some Indian number, repeatedly. So, there is something anomalous there. If they share information, maybe they can give this warning, and they are now expected to give this warning. Warning should be consumer, scam and transaction specific. This is the expectation from the PSP. The degree of negligence will also be there from the customer, which will depend on number of warnings. If the warning is very explicit, still customer has acted on it, then it is the customer's fault. Complexity of the scam, any history of the customer, so a customer is constantly falling for something, then the degree of negligence is higher. So, this is the kind of responsibility on the payment service provider. And obviously, if there is a fraud, the reimbursement has to be done within 5 days. It is split between the sender PSP and receiving PSP. And interestingly, the top 14 PSPs have been told to submit fraud data, and this data is published. So, you know which PSP has more frauds. So, it acts as a reputational constraint in a good way, positive way, that we have to do something. Data will be published in terms of per 1,000 transactions, per 1,000 user base, etc. But this is like, you know, what Niti Aayog used to do, aspirational shaming, so that people put some effort into improving their performance. So, this is the and there, of course, not everybody is compensated, only small consumers, micro enterprises, charities, etc. And there is a cap, of course, which is prescribed. And there is, of course, a strategy which I will leave for later reading for you. It's all there in the their website anyway. Now, as we see, payment service, payment fraud is an ecosystem problem in India also. So, this is a recent infographic which I thought will be interesting to look at. In a year, 17 million mobile connections have been disconnected, which is about 1% of the entire mobile. So, you can see the fraud activity is so large and so many connections are indulging in it, that this is the number which is there. I hope it is correct, but it really shows the volumes which are there. And interestingly, if you see on the right side, 10,000 crore have been lost in 1 year. Now, we saw some 300 crore number earlier. This is number of 2023 in almost 7 lakh complaints. So, it's a huge problem already, and that's why we need to pay attention to this.